Right. This week, from Monday the 26th of September all the way through to Sunday the 2nd of October is actually a National Inclusion Week. This is a week dedicated to celebrating inclusion and taking action to create a more inclusive workplace. Now, this year's National Inclusion Week theme is Time to Act, the Power of Now. So get things done now, that's what we say. We are delighted to welcome to Chaos TV now 3 professionals from across the third sector, joining us today to discuss National Inclusion Week and the wider subject of inclusion in general. So, hello everybody. Hello. How are we all doing? Hello. Thank you for joining us today, guys. We're delighted to obviously welcome you to Chaos TV. We know you're 3 very busy people, so we appreciate you being here. Let's start off with a little introduction to each of you, really. I'm going to do my Cilla Black now and tell you to sort of tell me your name, where you're from, and your sort of job role. If we start with you, Daniel.
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name's Dr. Daniel Derbyshire. I'm a research fellow at the University of Exeter, working at the European Centre for Environment and Human Health. Thanks.
Fantastic. And Shruti?
Hi everyone, my name is Shruti. I'm also a researcher at the University of Exeter in the European Centre for Environment and Human Health, and I've been researching hybrid working and inclusion in for small businesses and in the third sector.
Brilliant. And Theo?
Hi, my name is Dr. Theo Blackmore. I work for Disability Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, and I'm running a 2-year project called Disabled People's Organisations Sharing Experiences During COVID.
Brilliant stuff. So the purpose of today's chat really is for us to, we're talking about inclusion in general and the workplace when it comes to disability and age barriers. Earlier this month, we had here at Chaos TV, we had the pleasure of broadcasting the Making Work for Everybody conference, which was broadcast in Newquay. And that was via the Inclusivity Project in partnership with the likes of Exeter University and Age UK and Disability Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, which was fantastic. It was a great event. Daniel, if I kick off with you, can you tell us a little bit about the Inclusivity Project and sort of how and why it was founded?
Yeah, sure. But first, I'd like to start by thanking you all for your support on that day. We've had a lot of great feedback about how good it was, especially for the online participants. So I just want to say thanks for that.
Brilliant.
The Inclusivity Project then is funded by the European Regional Development Fund, and we're focused on small to medium-sized enterprises in particular, which means less than 250 employees. And we're particularly focused on helping them to become more inclusive in terms of employing disabled people and older people. We've been going for about 3 years now, and we're just at the kind of point where we're kind of trying to disseminate our findings, basically, and share them with the wider community.
Brilliant. And it is so important that we're talking about these issues, isn't it, Daniel? I think that's why the conference was such a great platform to really start talking about inclusion, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a really important agenda that businesses are increasingly aware of, and that it's something that's going to only grow over the coming years, I think, as more and more people become aware of it, and we kind of branch out into more and more areas of inclusion.
Yeah. And I know at the conference as well, I hope I pronounced this right, Dr. Esmails talked about some work in regards to the barriers that people face when looking into employment. Shruti, can I bring you in on this one? What barriers are there that people face?
In that research, Dr. Ismail, he interviewed quite a lot of people. He interviewed older people, so people over the age of 55 years, small and medium enterprise owners, HR experts, policymakers. He also interviewed disabled people and people with long-term mental health conditions. We wanted to understand, what factors shape the employment profile of older and disabled people in Cornwall, and how those factors interact and influence the employment profile and, their participation in the labor market. And I think what we want to highlight today is attitudes. So misperceptions is what we call them. So There are hurdles that prevent older and disabled people from being present and being and from participating in the labor market, and that have a lot to do with two misperceptions about health, misperceptions about performance of older people. For disabled people, it's misperceptions about regulations and misperceptions about time that people or disabled people might need off because of their disability. Costs, fear of costs. So the financial uncertainties about for small and medium enterprises, they have a fear of the costs related to making reasonable adjustments, for example, and this leads to a preference towards employing non-disabled people as they believe there are no associated adjustment costs and uncertainties. So with older people, especially, there's a what we call the performance hurdle, where we believe there are misperceptions that older people aren't able to perform as well. They're not as innovative enough, they're not as productive enough, and they don't bring as much to the table as younger people do, which of course we know is not true because they bring a wealth of experience. And again, experience can be misperceived as difficult to manage. So there's the manageability hurdle as well, where older people, there's a misperception that older people are harder to manage. So it's just an overview of the kind of misperceptions that impact the employment of older and disabled people in the labor market.
Yeah, and I think this is music to my ears, really, because as you may notice myself, I have a physical disability. I'm a full-time wheelchair user, and when it comes to employment and opportunities, you are aware of this sort of unconscious bias sometimes. Theo, what would you say are the benefits to businesses employing older people and people with disabilities?
Well, there's lots of benefits. Just to go back to Esmail's research a minute, because what was very interesting about his research was that it shows that most disabled people don't perceive their impairment or the fact that they might use a wheelchair or whatever disability aids they use as the main barrier. In fact, that they didn't really talk about that at all. They talked about all the stuff out there in the world, like bus timetables, transport systems, employment systems. Daniel will talk a bit in a minute about the unconscious bias, the lack of adjustments that people make. So it's not necessarily the individual and his or her impairments which are the main barriers to employing disabled people. In terms of the benefits, it's across the board, really. The more diverse your board or your workforce can be, the more representative it can be of the population, and the more likely you are to be able to attract different customers from across the board. So, if you employ disabled people, then you might start to attract more disabled people as customers and as people who use your services. Disabled people mostly acquire their impairments throughout their lifetime. So we accumulate experience throughout our lifetime, and we have a wealth of experience. So, disabled people might well be accountants, secretaries, shop assistants, whatever it is you think that you might need in your business. Basically, many of those are disabled people. Across the country as a whole, it's about 1 in 7 people are disabled people. So that's like 12 million people. And in Cornwall, that's even higher. So it's 1 in 5 people are disabled people. So by employing these people in your workforce, disabled and older people, Shruti's also already talked about the wealth of experience these people can bring to your company and to broaden your customer base. So basically, it makes good business sense at the end of the day.
It does, and it's that understanding, isn't it, that people with disabilities as well, they have a skill set and they have something to bring. Often businesses are scared when it comes to disabilities. And I want to stick with you there, Theo, along the lines of, we're talking about Cornwall in specific. I know you're involved with Disability Cornwall. How do we encourage more disabled people and older people into employment?
We just need to make people feel welcome, basically. The vast majority of disabled people, you mentioned that yourself there, you are a wheelchair user. The vast majority of disabled people don't use wheelchairs. The big bit that people are frightened of in the business world is, how much is this going to cost me to employ a disabled person? Well, the costs can actually be zero. Most disabled people don't use wheelchairs, don't require massive adjustments to the buildings. And many buildings now are built and are fully accessible anyway. So they are accessible for people who use wheelchairs or use other mobility aids or have other access needs. So it just does make good business sense to do that. And it's about being welcoming and encouraging, and all stages of the recruitment process need to be made as inclusive as possible, whether that's the advert, whether that's the wording that you use in the advert, whether places that you put the advert, the recruitment process in terms of where you hold the interviews, what the interviews are like. All these different stages of employment need to be made as friendly and welcoming as possible.
Absolutely agree. And Daniel, at the conference, I know you did a speech around sort of unconscious bias and its presence in the workplace. How does unconscious bias sort of manifest itself? Could you give us a little bit of information about what it is and what we have to do to minimise it?
Yeah, sure. So from a practical point of view, I think Theo just touched on it there at the end. It cannot really operate in many stages of the employment and the recruitment process in particular. Starting from the very start, when you start to list your essential job criteria, for example, you can already start to exclude people at that stage unnecessarily by, for example, stipulating that people need a degree when it's perhaps not actually necessary. In terms of when you choose who to shortlist, who to interview, as Theo alluded, how to interview, who to hire, obviously. Then once you've got people in, you're going to be choosing who to offer training and development opportunities to, who to promote ultimately. And of course, those two things are linked. Unfortunately, at times you need to make firing decisions as well. And so who you let go during the tough times, as we've seen over COVID, for example, often falls on disabled or older people more so than especially young people. So there are lots of ways in which you can do that. An example more generally related to gender, for example, as an example, was Thames Water. And they were looking to recruit water engineers, so people who go and install and fix water pipes and things like that. And they were getting really high rates of men applying. Not many women, about 8% women were applying. And what they did was they went through the language used in their job adverts and they removed what were considered to be more masculine terms, which turned out to be things like competitive, things like that, demanding, challenging, words like that, were considered to be more kind of masculine, combative. And after they did that, they found that they were getting 50-50 applicants between men and women. And so something as simple as the language in their adverts was affecting who was applying. And of course, if you don't have the right people applying, then making those inclusive employment decisions is not going to be possible in the end. In terms of how we can kind of think about reducing or minimizing bias in the workplace, I think that it's important to kind of understand the ways in which in terms of psychologically, we operate within a kind of dual process where we have an unconscious and a conscious mind. And so it's easy to operate within the unconscious world and these unconscious biases. So we need to be conscious of the unconscious and try to be more conscious. And the way to do that is to reflect on decisions. So to kind of take time, go back and relook at your decisions after making them. And the other is to make them in groups, so consult with other people and try and have as broad a range of opinions feeding in on those decisions as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some sort of great advice and really simple changes that can make huge difference. Like that example you gave there was fantastic. The simple wording of an advert can make a huge difference, which is great. And sort of talking about how the world is changing, we live in a different type of generation these days. I know you've sort of touched on it briefly already, Shruti, but can you talk to us a little bit more about what other ways of working there are? I know we touched on the hybrid working. Can you tell us a bit more about how that might be more inclusive for these groups of people?
Yeah, all our knowledge about hybrid working is relatively new. I mean, we all knew what remote working was prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, but and much of our knowledge and research about non-traditional ways of work that predate the pandemic are focused on remote working, which is defined as working exclusively from home. And we know that before the pandemic, less than 5% of the population in the UK worked exclusively from home, in that they were remote workers. But obviously, because of mandatory lockdown, because of offices closing, the pandemic then mandated that we all work from home for a significant period of time, and that changed people's mindsets. It was sort of the experiment that none of us wanted, but it seems to have made a lasting impact, and it's introduced this concept of hybrid working, which is an arrangement where people alternate between working at home and working in the office, in the traditional office, as the need arises. And there's been a lot of talk about how hybrid working is a more inclusive way of approaching the way we work and the way we view modern work and the way we view our work week. Hybrid work specifically refers to where we work. So the location, it is a form of flexible working where you get to choose if you want to work from home or in the office. And why it's more inclusive is that people that were traditionally excluded from the labor market as a result of, say, for example, disabilities or the lack of transport or affordability to get to work, or childcare, or just caring responsibilities. All of these people that were previously excluded from the labor market now have the option to work and be present in the labor market because the employment sector has opened up its mindset to the concept of hybrid work. And this has become a possibility for people working across sectors, so large organizations, private organizations, but also third sector organizations, public sector organizations, small businesses. Doesn't have to be Microsoft or Google, which have all had revolutionary hybrid working policies in place. But it's also small businesses that are opening up their minds, charities are opening up their minds to the possibility of hybrid working because everybody thinks it's a more inclusive way and a more fair way of allowing people to work. For employees, it's an opportunity to reimagine how they can balance work and life. Because as we know, work-life balance is very important, but we don't pay enough heed to it. And there are a lot of sort of mental health and physical health repercussions of not paying heed to your work-life balance. But also for organizations, it's a way to minimize overhead costs, costs associated with providing facilities in the office. So there are benefits to hybrid working, but it is an experiment. We don't know what it will. We don't have any longitudinal data on how it will work. So I think we're all imagining and reimagining how we're going to approach this on the go. But I think we all agree that we have to explore it because it allows the labour market participation of previously excluded groups.
Yeah, and I think that is there's the big debate, isn't it? You're either one way or the other. A lot of people are pro, working in an office environment, and then a lot of people much prefer the working at home, and not just because they may have a disability or they may have transport issues. This affects everyone. Some people, it works better for their home life, childcare issues. It can affect everyone in the long run. So it's an ongoing debate, isn't it?
It is, and I think we have to move on from this dichotomy, like you were just saying, dichotomy of office versus remote work. It no longer is one or the other. We actually have the option to choose and pick how we work. So organizations like Google, they've implemented the 3-in-2 model where you go into the office 3 days a week and then you stay home 2 days a week. But I think what I fundamentally want to stress upon is that choice has to lie with the workforce. Because it essentially any policy that we implement or any policy or service that we implement towards hybrid working will impact the workforce. So they should have a say in how that policy is designed, and their choice is, I think, paramount.
I agree. And Theo, you're the project manager, I believe, for the disabled people's organisations sharing experiences during COVID-19. Obviously, as we touched on there already, the pandemic had a huge effect when it came to working patterns and things. From obviously your studies and your involvement within that project, what are you able to add anything to that?
Well, so it was very interesting. I mean, as we all know, COVID really hit some populations harder than others. And it turns out that more than 60% of the people who died from COVID were disabled people. So disabled people's organisations across the country, these are very small organisations in general, and they employ large numbers of disabled people. And so these organisations, I think as many organisations did, lots of small and medium enterprises did, they closed their doors in their buildings and started doing these hybrid working models where they all started working from home in the first instance, but now they're opening up again. They're operating much more of a hybrid model and they're running rota systems so they can make sure their offices aren't too crowded at any one time. And most of these organisations have stayed that way. Some organisations have actually closed their buildings and decided not to rent buildings any longer, so they're finding that they're saving. One organisation said we found we could save £300,000 a year by not having a building any longer. They rent out rooms in other buildings for meetings and things like that, or they meet up with each other in safe spaces outdoors, or even just in a pub or a bar or a pub car park, not a pub car park, a pub garden. So that the ways of working have completely changed, and they go to people's houses now much more to deliver services on a one-to-one basis, so that disabled people don't necessarily need to leave their houses and go to the buildings, but the people come out of the buildings and go to them. So, these organisations have changed fundamentally in the way that they're working, and this is something that happened universally across the country. All these organisations, most of these organisations are still operating in this way now. Just to add a bit to Shruti's thing, the whole hybrid working situation, this is something that disabled people have been campaigning about for years. We've been asking for it for a very long time, and it's been very difficult. And most employers have been saying, oh, it's going to be too costly, you need the software, you need the hardware, this, that and the other, we need lots of training. And then COVID happened, bang, overnight, it all just changed. And everybody was doing this model. So, these things have happened very quickly, and the changes are things that we're all still getting used to. And as Shruti says, it's a long-term process. We'll need to be doing research over time to see how it beds in and how things stay the same or how they change.
Yeah, and I think if the last few years have proved anything, is the fact that under immense pressure and a short amount of time, it's doable. That has proved that it's absolutely doable for companies to become a little bit more flexible with their workers. Daniel, I sort of want to bring you in here. Obviously, we're talking a lot about businesses, the changes that they can make and stuff. Obviously, there are a lot of businesses that are already out there doing amazing things. And I want to talk a bit about what does good look like and some of the good examples of good practice which we can learn.
Yeah, so I think that good work is an important concept when thinking about employment. It's not just quantity, as it were. It's the quality of jobs is really important as well. That touches on a lot of aspects. The obvious one is pay, but that's kind of fundamental in some ways. You also want to think about the work culture, the work-life balance that's provided there. In terms of employment contracts, you want to think about job security, so that people aren't in a precarious situation with respect to their employment prospects down the road. You want to think about flexibility, which I think is key. One of the key things to the whole puzzle in some ways is just being more flexible. That's not just a benefit for disabled people, as you alluded there. It's also a benefit for people with kids, adult caring responsibilities, all sorts of other kind of family and personal circumstances. I think that good work would also be socially enriching, socially stimulating in some way. And I think perhaps most importantly from our kind of perspective, that good work can and perhaps even should be good for people's physical and mental health and well-being. And so really, in the ideal sense, good work is kind of a really good package of kind of work conditions that really add up to quite a lot of good things for the employee. In terms of the good examples and good practice, I think possibly to put her on the spot, I would pass to Shruti potentially to talk about some of the work, for example, that she's been doing with Age UK, because I think that's a really good example, for example.
Yeah, Shruti, what do you say? Have you got any sort of examples of your work then with Age UK, and sort of generally when we're talking about inclusion, what is the research showing?
I just want to talk a little bit about good practice. So we think inclusion should be about the workforce. And by that we mean essentially including the workforce in and their views and perspectives on what the future of work should look like. It can't be a group of people that don't know what it's like to essentially do that work, to be deciding what a hybrid work policy or any sort of culture change should look like in the future. So the good practice that we recommend is for any organization, small, big, public, private sector, any organization to embark on this process of culture change is co-design. It's what we think is going to make a difference, because people finally will have a chance to share their views on what the challenges have been, where they think the future of work should go, and what sort of culture of work they want to be part of in the future. And for that to happen, we have to include their views. So we recommend that organizations actively speak to their workforce, facilitate discussions where people have a safe space to really air any sort of concerns that they might have. Because I think the bottom line is hybrid work may not be for everyone. There might be people that still need to go into work for a variety of reasons. For example, let's bring up the cost of living crisis. Things have changed so quickly. Last year around this time, we were talking about how hybrid work and remote work was here to stay. But 1 year since, we're already talking about how people need to go into the office because they can't afford to pay their bills at home. They can't afford Wi-Fi. They can't afford heating. So they need that office space to go into. Things have changed so quickly. So it's essentially about having those conversations repeatedly with your workforce, asking them if things have changed, what's working for them, what's not working for them, and how the culture of work can be made to suit their needs over the needs of the organization, because essentially it's the workforce that makes up the organization. So in terms of good practice, we wholly support asking people what they want, and not making decisions about remote work versus hybrid work versus office-based work. It's really not up to anyone else except from the workforce.
Yeah, no, I think that's, you've sort of hit the nail on the head there. It's having that open conversation, isn't it? And just making the workplace more person-centered. It's very easy sometimes to group everyone into a same situation, isn't it? When actually we should be treating everyone's circumstances individually. Theo, if I can come to you, obviously the reason we're having these conversations today is because it's National Inclusion Week. The theme of this week is the power of now. So, yeah, obviously it's great that we're talking about this and raising awareness, but what can be done now? Like, it's not going to be a change overnight, but we're taking the steps, aren't we?
We are taking the steps, and organisations are moving they're moving gradually towards different ways of working and all of that. I mean, things did happen very quickly over COVID, so there was a sudden change. So, for example, the organisations that I'm investigating, they all changed the way that they deliver their services. So many disabled people's organisations are very reactive. So what happens is if you have a need or an inquiry, you contact that organisation and you go and visit that organisation and you make contact with that organisation. What happened during COVID was that the organisations became very proactive. So instead of waiting for the phone to ring for somebody to call in, that many organisations actually started picking the phone up and phoning people outwards. So there were many disabled people who were living isolated lives because we were all told to stay indoors and all told to stay away from everybody. And what happened was then the social contact these people were experiencing massively reduced. Many disabled people live alone. So as organisations across the country, it's quite interesting because it all happened on the spur of the moment, and all these organisations started operating in the same kind of way, but without anyone coordinating it and saying, hey, look, everybody, let's start doing things in this way. And these organisations all started phoning people up and saying, hey, do you need any food? Have you got everything that you need in terms of medication? Have you got everything that you need in terms of anything at all? And hey, look, let's just have a chat. And so these organisations became very proactive, and it was a real lifeline for many disabled people. So some things can change very quickly like that. That was the power, I suppose, that was the power of then, wasn't it? The power of now is that many of these organisations have recognised that these things really are very positive, and so they've carried on doing them. And many of the ways of working are changing just across the board. So I know, for example, council buildings, many council buildings that we all used to be aware of in the local communities, these council buildings, many have closed down and being sold off because the council decided that people can work remotely or work in a hybrid way. So they have communal offices, you book a desk, you show up there, you go to the office space, but most of the time you work from home. So for many organisations, what's happening very quickly is that things have changed almost instantaneously. For smaller businesses, that might be more of a challenge, but again, many businesses, small businesses now are not renting their own premises, but are going into other shared premises for a certain number of days per week, and holding meetings in shared buildings. So, this is the power of now. We are in a situation of change. As we come out of COVID, we're going into a cost of living crisis. It does seem a bit, doesn't it, like we're going from one crisis to another, and we're lurching from this to that. So, the cost of living crisis is going to mean, like Shruti says, that lots more people might be wanting to go and work from office spaces because they're nice and warm, and there's other people there. My PhD research was about social capital and the strength that we all get from meeting and knowing other people. And what happened when we all started working from home was that we weren't going to offices and mixing and mingling with each other and having those water cooler moments, talking about what we saw on Chaos TV yesterday together. What we were doing is we're all at home on our own, stuck on our own. So, there is a big power of social capital, and that we need to keep hold of that. And a lot of our businesses also have kind of cultural capital. We build up understandings about how businesses work, what they do, how they operate, how we do things around here. And that all kind of disappeared during the pandemic. So there are some things that I think we need to fight a bit to make sure that we keep hold of, so that we still have the social contacts that we know and cherish in our lives, and we all use the opportunities to gain knowledge that we can use to build up our own skills and expertise throughout our life. So it's like Shruti was saying, it is a real hybrid that we need to be doing. There's pros and cons to all the different models, and we need to make sure we bring out the best bits of each one and learn from that and do that and use that to build on for the future.
Absolutely. And like you said, we're never going to please everybody, but we have to start somewhere and treat people as individuals and sort of make it sort of more person-centered, which is important. As we sort of come to an end here, guys, I want to give you all the opportunity to sort of have a sort of closing statement each and just sort of talk about inclusion in general and where people can turn to for any help or advice if they've been experiencing any issues with this matter. Daniel, if I come to you first.
Sure, thanks. I think in one way I'd like to pick up on what Theo said as well, and point out that, especially because of COVID, there's been this opportunity, and one of the things that has really kind of come forward in that time is the tech solutions, things like Microsoft Teams and Zoom and things. They've really improved a lot over that time, and so that really facilitates a lot of the working as well. And the other aspect is more widely rolled out high-speed broadband, and so we are kind of really are at the point now where the tech is there to support it as well. In terms of where people can go, obviously our website has got a lot of good resources on. Also, ACAS has got good resources. There's the Beacon Project. And then you'll find lots of resources available through our website to signpost to other places.
Perfect. And Shruti, yourself as well.
Yeah, I wanted to again pick up on what Theo said about social isolation. We found that in our work with Age UK. Obviously, we did this work with Age UK. We did the whole co-design with Age UK, Cornwall and Isles of Scilly. And we facilitated a series of conversations which really gave us insight into how COVID had impacted people's ways of working and what we could do to create a culture of inclusion as we moved into hybrid working. And one of the things that really stood out was this lack of connection. And I think we really need to stress upon the fact that a lot of people might live alone and might look at the world of work as their way of interacting with other people. It's where they get their social interaction from. So there are things that we need to be very mindful of. I know there's been a lot of chatter about how productivity and performance will suffer if people start working from home more regularly. But research has shown that that's not the case. In fact, a majority of employers believe that there has been absolutely no hurdles or barriers to productivity and performance from their employees, even if they're working from home or hybrid. So we need to dispel these myths around what hybrid work and remote work are. And, push aside agendas, because it's really about the workforce. It's about individuals. And like Theo said, disabled people have been shouting about this for ages, but obviously it took the COVID-19 pandemic, which affects a larger section of the population, for people to finally take action. And now that we've been presented with this opportunity, we have to start listening to individuals as individuals. And I think my key takeaway is that one size doesn't fit all. I think we've been shown time and again that one single hybrid work policy or culture change policy cannot equitably impact everyone. True inclusion is about listening to people as individuals. So having those conversations repeatedly with everyone is, I think, key to the whole thing. And the other key takeaway for me is that any sort of culture change, especially one that's geared towards inclusion, is it's a marathon, not a sprint. So it's a very long process. It requires periodic amendments. It requires constant consultation and collaboration with the workforce. And if an organization is prepared to do that, then I think they're on their path to inclusion.
That's fantastic advice there. And Theo, sort of a closing statement from you as well.
Well, just in closing, I'd like to say that inclusion makes sense for everybody. I think there's all sorts of benefits for disabled people, obviously. So if you're getting disabled people into the workplace, then you're reducing the welfare benefits bill, you're increasing social capital for these people, you're increasing contacts with these people, you're getting people connected into the local community. That has a real benefit for the individual who you're employing, has a massive benefit for the customers who are coming to your business and who are using your services, in that they know that you're being inclusive, they know that you're being welcoming to the broad community as a whole. That's true both for disabled and for older people. And it sort of diversity in the workplace, it just massively increases the kind of your turnover, your revenue, and it has a big impact on your takings. So there is a massive benefit to you as an organisation to be employing more diverse sections of your community, including disabled and older people. In terms of where businesses might turn to for information and advice, I mean, Shruti did lots of work with Age UK, and if you want to be employing older people, then there'd be a great port of call for you. In terms of employing disabled people, then someone like Disability Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, that would be a great port of call, because it can seem a little bit overwhelming. You've got to do this, you've got to do that, you've got to do the other. So one place to go to which can say, hey, yeah, you don't need to do that, you don't need to do the other, just do this, and just talk to the individual. At the end of the day, if you're in doubt, ask the disabled person or the older person. But these two organisations can be really helpful to you, or your local disabled people's organisation if you're watching elsewhere across the country.
Yeah. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Like I said at the start, I know how busy you all are, so I really do appreciate your involvement in this chat. And just generally, we're talking about it. We're raising awareness of inclusion and when it comes to the employer and the employee. So really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us. And I'm sure we will see you again at some point.
Thanks for giving us the airspace. Thanks for the time.
No worries. Take care, guys. Goodbye.